Good afternoon, everybody. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to remind all of you, please, to silence your cell phones. And at the end, or towards the end of the panel, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. Please come up to the mic here in the aisle. When you are asked, please state your name and your affiliation, and please come with a question. My name is Adam Kane. I am the director of Naval Institute Press, and it's my pleasure today to welcome you to the Outpacing the Threat, Fielding the Unmanned Systems for the High-End Fight. Our moderator for today's panel is Mr. Brian Clark. Brian is Senior Fellow and Director at the Center for Defense Concepts and Technology at the Hudson Institute. He is an expert in naval operations, electronic warfare, and autonomous systems. He previously served as Senior Defense Strategist on the Chief of Naval Operations staff and is the recipient of the Department of the Navy Superior Service Medal and Legion of Merit. I'll now turn the stage over to him and he can introduce the rest of the panelists. Brian?
All right, well, thank you, Adam. Hope everybody can hear me. Appreciate you guys coming out today for this great discussion that we're going to have about autonomous systems, how we're introducing them into the naval forces. And with us, we have the perfect panel for that conversation. So to my left is Rebecca Gassler. She is the Portfolio Acquisition Executive, newly minted, for robotic and autonomous systems in the Department of the Navy. She comes from a long history in the acquisition world, so I won't go through all the details, but trust that she is the expert that we want to have here today to talk about where the Navy's going with regard to its family of robotic and autonomous systems. So to her left, we have Rear Admiral Keith Hash, who is the Commander of Naval Air Warfare Center Weapons Division and the Assistant Commander for Test and Evaluation and Naval Air Systems Command. Obviously a career aviator and someone in the acquisition community, but in particular today, we're going to want to talk with him about how test and evaluation is going to evolve to accommodate the adaptability that we need in the future force and the need to bring in new systems more quickly than we have in the past. To his left is Vice Admiral Seiko Okano, who is the Principal Military Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. She previously was here out in San Diego as Commander of NAVWAR, or the Naval Information Warfare Command. It had various names, that's the last one I remember, and is now leading the Navy's efforts to bring new technologies into the force, including through the Rapid Capabilities Office that the Department of the Navy recently stood up. So thank you for being here today. And to her left is Adam Chukamungus, who is the Executive Director for Phantom Works Air Dominance at the Boeing Company, where he is in charge of air domain autonomous systems, including MQ-25, but not exclusively. And we're going to be able to talk with him today about some of the industry efforts to field these systems at the scale and the pace that the military needs to be successful. So thank you all for being here today. Obviously, autonomous systems are a important and growing part of military services. We've got a ton of displays here today about autonomous systems and where they can take us in the future. But the Navy has had a challenged track record in terms of fielding these systems at the scale that we need and maybe with the level of adaptability that we need to be able to keep up with the threat. We see in Ukraine how adaptability is becoming kind of the main competition in warfare in a lot of ways, and autonomous systems give you this ability to change both the behavior and the characteristics of a system much more quickly. So we're seeing that as the cutting edge application of autonomous systems. So so my first question to the panel, to give them a kind of a chance to give some opening remarks, is how are you working to bring autonomous systems into the department, into the Navy, into the fleet more quickly, and be able to lend this kind of adaptability that we see happening every day in Ukraine? So Rebecca, let's start with you.
Hey, afternoon. Yeah, so a couple things. So I think the Navy went all in on the portfolio management concept and that to help enable this. And so we brought in dozens of systems from across the entire Navy and the Marine Corps to give us the latitude to create the best solutions and optimize the solutions without the stovepipes of being as an aviation-only solution or a surface-only solution, for example. And then on top of that, they've given us, authority to contract, to experiment, to do prize challenges, all things that we can get after the capability faster. They've given us authorities to do our own, cyber approvals. If you've worked through the ATO process, you know that sometimes that can take a while. And we're exploring all the concepts on how we can also consolidate our funding so that we can actually make those trades as we experiment and go after the solutions that best solve the problems. And I'll just say, how do we go faster? We're gonna take one beat. We stood up in December, and we're gonna slow down for just a second before we speed up to basically go create that portfolio strategy. Right, so you mentioned Ukraine, right? If you've read a lot about Ukraine, they talk about the conveyor belt model, and their policies and laws are different than ours. But how do we translate that concept and the concept of their adaptability? They can come back after every mission. They hot wash. We went and visited their Navy. We learned how they did it, and how do you translate that into inside of our policies, our laws, the way we contract. And so we are working on that right now, so that once we do kind of open the floodgates, we're off and running. And so you will see that start to speed up again in the coming weeks.
Thank you. And we'll dig into some more of those topics more as we go along. So, Admiral?
Hey, great. So as the commander of a warfare center that does all phases of research, development, test, and evaluation for weapons and weapons systems, we've got a long history of developing, testing, and delivering autonomous things. That's what most of our weapons are. And so we get into a whole new class. I mean, when we get to the broader scope of autonomous vehicles, autonomous ships, aircraft, undersea vehicles, it is a new thing to think about, but it's applying some of the knowledge we've gained before and the techniques we've used before to do that. So that's an important part. How are we going to go faster and be adaptable? To me, I've learned over many years of acquisition, the teams that go fast are the ones that work together. And so partnerships between industry and government have to be there. If we don't partner, we're not going to go fast. We're doing that now. My command alone, because we are a research and development test and evaluation organization, we can do cooperative arrangements with partners throughout industry to help them, one, either get into the space if they're not a traditional defense company, or with our traditional defense companies, help us do pilots and find ways to go faster. And so we're working on that. We're even doing some internal pilots on our own, developing some of our own technologies and learning how some of the companies we see out there that are rapidly developing technologies, using their practices and moving forward. And there's a few other techniques that I think we'll dig into more and get into digital engineering and things like that,
Right.
but how we're moving the ball forward. But definitely an area we all need to learn, and we all need to learn together. If we try to do it in stovepipes, we're just going to bump into each other and not actually solve the problems faster.
Thanks, Admiral. Admiral Khan.
So I'm going to reiterate what you kind of said, Brian. At the Secretariat level, from where I sit, I think there is a recognition, and I know this is going to sound obvious, there's a recognition that autonomy is changing the character of warfare faster than any other mission area. Not incrementally, fundamentally. Fundamentally. It's, obviously we're seeing it in Ukraine, we're seeing it in the Red Sea. It's cost and position, mass. Just like the amount of mass that you can accumulate very, very quickly without having exotic systems. It's changing everything. And, I think from the Secretary's perspective and from the CNO's perspective, there's complete alignment of how we want to attack this. So the CNO put out his fighting instructions a couple of days ago. I think autonomy is front and center in that, if you read it, on how he wants to stand up these hedge forces. So from the operational community, I think he's trying to get his arms around that. On the Secretariat side, the Secretary is saying, hey, we're going to actually take all of these fragmented programs. As Rebecca mentioned, the first thing he asked me to do when I checked on board was, where are all of our autonomous efforts going on? So we did a data call, and it was, over 200 projects. I think it was like 6 PEOs, over 20 program offices. We were spending a lot of money. We weren't getting a lot of return on investment, frankly. And I think there was a realization from the Secretary that he wanted to be a lot more effective at how we spent money in autonomy. So you saw the creation of PAE-RAS. Obviously, the first PAE that he stood up. I think that was deliberate in the fact that of all the mission areas, this is the one that was changing the fastest. He's also challenged Rebecca. Obviously, the other piece of this is let's bring in our best and brightest to really get after this problem. So pulling folks from other jobs that were really important to really lead this effort was a deliberate move. Folks that really also weren't your traditional, what you would call autonomous people who are actually smart in networks, smart in software, were the folks that were actually deliberately put in charge of PA-RAS. The other piece of that was really challenging the acquisition model. Instead of saying, okay, so we're in this world where, the character warfare is changing really fast. What does our FAR-based system want us to do? Why don't you go buy 1,000, and then we're going to store them somewhere, and we're gonna need, hundreds of more sailors to figure out how to fix these things, right? We're going to stand up an ISCA, and we just don't have the time for that. This is just not how this works. So rethinking that entire acquisition model of what does, if things are changing very, very quickly, what does that look like fundamentally from an acquisition perspective and also, frankly, an operational perspective? So I think there's a lot. I mean, this is a fantastic topic to talk about. There's a lot of change here, and I think there's a lot of innovation here in how we're actually thinking about it.
Thanks, Admiral. And we'll dig into that topic of where should we be investing in the infrastructure for adaptation versus just buying hardware that we're going to sit on the shelf somewhere. Adam.
Hi, good afternoon. Adam Chuckamangus here with Boeing. So from an industry perspective, one thing that I'm focused on are future uncrewed systems and how to move quickly and how to build at scale. And some of those things come down to some fundamental changes that we are making in terms of architectures and digital environments that we can build upon. And I know a lot of the folks in industry resonate with that statement. So one of the things that we're doing is building digital ecosystems, digital threads, digital models, where industry, customers, suppliers are all working from the same digital footprint. That is one enabler. And then layered on top of that, we're looking at foundational reference architectures and standards so that we can all in parallel develop together. That's another item that can help accelerate our development through the process. If we're all working to the same interfaces, standards, we can all build upon that together. When we talk about autonomy, I think it's also good to recognize the fact that we have flight autonomy and mission autonomy, and there has to be that in the middle area that can segregate the two. When we have that flight autonomy that is flight safety critical software, we don't want to be touching that very often, but having that isolated layer and having that mission autonomy, that's where we can really rapidly adapt and rapidly field software for the ever-changing threat. Finally, as we're designing things for this new environment of scaling at rate, we really need to be thinking about production and sustainment during the upfront design, and what does that look like so that we can actually field these in a peacetime environment, little sustainment required, so that when they're needed, we can go off and utilize them. That's a lot of some of the what and the foundational, how do we design things differently these days? And then it's always important to note like the relationships and the general sense of shared priorities and goals between all of industry and the government so that we are aligned in enabling our people to go faster. I think it's going to be important. We can't just say we're going to go faster without changing the process and enabling and empowering the people. So I think that's some of the things that we'll talk about today, maybe a little bit, and pull on. How are we going to enable the people to make the right decisions that they are empowered to make? And when it becomes too risky for them to make that call, to elevate it up through leadership so that that we do actually move faster.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, those are good topics for us to dig into also. So to start off with, Rebecca, one thing you brought up, which I thought is useful to bring out to the group, is you talked about how the PAE brings in all the or a lot of the existing programs under one roof. And you've got maybe a couple hundred programs that are in theory underneath the portfolio. So does that give you some flexibility down the road as we start to figure out which of these systems make the most sense to maybe make some choices on where we put effort into, which ones do we sort of put by the wayside? Is that the idea, is that you got a lot more to work with now and you can make trades across them given the authorities that you have?
Absolutely. I think, yes, we have a lot more to work with. Yes, we need to look at not keeping all of them.
Right.
We also have to do that, right? We've got to
Right.
be smart about where we actually spend the money and how much deliberate functional overlap we have in those systems.
Yeah.
Versus they happen to be spawned in different organizations at different times and they're different resource sponsors and they shouldn't all exist.
Right.
Our budgets are increasing, right? So it's not that we're going to have less things, we are going to have the right things. And I think to get after that, you've got to truly kind of understand the problem, not just I have $1 billion, so I'm just going to go buy $1 billion worth of pick a
Right.
thing, right? Do we truly understand the problem, and do we understand the role of how the tailored offsets, right? So CNO talks about the tailored offsets, right? Those tailored offsets combine to make your tailored forces.
Right.
And how do those tailored forces interoperate with your traditional, your general purpose and your manned forces? And only when you truly understand that can you really get after the optimization of where are you now decomposed back into which kit you need for any given tailored offset in any AOR.
So Admiral Hash, it seems like when we talk about this idea of tailored forces, we're trying to figure out which systems make sense to keep and which ones we need to maybe put in the bin. We're going to need to have people working directly with the operational forces in the fleet, and in a way that acquisition people traditionally have not. Now, I think in the aviation world, it's a little bit more common to have that kind of interaction. But is that what we're going to have to do across the board now? Is we're going to have a bunch of PAE, RAS people out there working directly with operational units to sort this out?
Yeah, I think, Brian, it may look like that, it may look a little different, but what you need is all those perspectives. I mean, to go fast, you need the developer, you need the engineer, you need the person who actually knows how the thing works. You need some folks in the acquisition community to know how we're buying it, maybe understand how we're going to certify it. Because, there are some processes that are there because they're written in blood, and we got to do it. You want things safe aboard a ship. You want that kind of thing. So that's important. But then you need the operator. You need the folks who are actually going to be using the system, touching it. And you don't want to wait. Well, traditionally, we do that in very sequential sequences.
Right.
We write a requirement. We throw it over the fence on a contract. We wait a few months, maybe a year or more, before we get the first look at the design. And then, 2 more years later before the developmental test gets it and they start thinking about it. And then eventually we give it to operational test, which might be, like you said, in aviation, we have dedicated operational test squadrons, or you give it to a ship or somebody. The first time the user sees it 5 or 6 years after the requirement. That's unacceptable.
Right.
We've got to smush those groups together. And so at the very beginning, even in the early design, you're going to have developmental folks, you're going to have operational folks, and whether they come from a test community or they come from the operational fleet, engaged in that design, and you need to bring that design to a relevant environment faster. It can't be on a paper for 2 or 3 years. Right. And so a lot of what's nice is some of the things, especially entering your space, Rebecca, the smaller unmanned, and they're commercial, and so they're used to that kind of thing. And so we have to, as a government, think more like the commercial space and enter that space early. Right. And we need to partner with them, and that's one of the things that my command does quickly. Anybody entering this space, especially in the weapons, but now in the autonomy world, in the unmanned world, how do we partner with you now before you get the contract, so you can start to understand, and we can start to help shape your requirements that fit in a relevant environment? How do we create an environment, maybe it's at sea or it's over land, that you can come out and test early on, early prototypes? Don't wait till you get the final product before we put it to test. Let's put it in a relevant environment with the relevant observers and their perspectives so that we can get feedback back to you as quickly as possible. And I think that's important. We've done that supporting things like Replicator when we brought a bunch of surface vessels out. My team put a bunch of OP4 Also, unmanned autonomous surface vessels, because targets have been doing that for a long time, and we had relevant environments. I mean, there was a ton of learning by these companies. And so how do we continue to do that and provide those spaces so that they can iterate quickly and move faster?
So Admiral O'Connor,
Can I add to this real?
Yeah.
So I mean, look, you got it right, Brownies. You've got like how we do that in the aviation world is exactly how we need to do it. I do think we have a systemic overall testing problem.
Right.
Whether, I don't want to call out organizations, but having done this for a very long time, we typically don't do that.
Right.
We typically will, the testers will not come in
Nope.
at the beginning. They will wait until the very, very end and then fail you. And then you don't have any money to really fix anything. So I do think that, I think organizationally, structurally, we've got to relook at how we do that more in line with how Brownie's been doing it,
Yeah.
how Replicator was doing it.
Right.
And I think that's going to be a fundamental shift.
So do you think we're going to have to establish these kind of cross-functional teams that are operating within the PAEs? Like when you were at POIWS and you had to do this for the rapid capability cell that you did for the Middle Eastern air defense problem.
Yeah, I don't know how else you do this when you're moving this fast at this velocity, especially in this area. I don't know how the traditional way is going to work.
So Adam, so industry is going to be expected to participate in this sort of DevOps approach to determining what the right capability is and then testing it very quickly kind of in the field. So it's a different model for how you get paid essentially, right? Because you're not buying the product. Now I'm essentially paying industry to participate in this process.
So I do think some of our contracts are set up this way. And I wholeheartedly agree that bringing the end user and operators in early helps shape requirements and helps shape the way that we develop and prioritize what matters to the end user. So wholeheartedly agree with that. And then I think we're going to see a little bit of a paradigm shift here when we're talking about autonomy. I think it works both ways. We're going to have to pull the end user forward, but then also after the systems are fielded, we're going to actually have to figure out how to deploy engineering or the right resources to the forward-facing portions, because they're going to see some mission autonomy that they might need to adapt rapidly. So that doesn't mean it has to come all the way back to the OEM to go and change. It could be you go and change it on the fly in your next sortie. It's up and running. So I think both things, you got to move the operational forward so it's all working together. And also you might have to deploy some engineering towards the operational units so that we can iterate quickly out in the field.
So that kind of raises the issue of digital engineering in general, and how we have a very heterogeneous approach to how we apply it. So I'm interested in each of your perspectives on how we need to apply model-based system engineering, digital twins to this application area to be able to identify combinations of tactics and technologies that will solve an operational problem, and then how do we evolve that over time? So Rebecca, I'll start with you. Like, how do you envision PA RAS using digital engineering to better understand what your opportunities are?
So I'm an engineer at heart.
Yeah.
So everyone, if you guys know me, you know I'm really into model-based systems engineering. So all in. And I think Adam's point earlier about we've got to have a reference architecture. I get overused term, but we have to have we've got to have a solid reference architecture with the functions prescribed in the different layers of autonomy. We talk about like the flight autonomy, the platform autonomy, with the mission autonomy, maybe even payload autonomy, right, on how it directs the platform. We've got to understand those interfaces, what data is exposed, what you need to ingest or what will be available. And in order to do that, I mean, yes, you could PowerPoint it, I guess, but, in my mind, we actually start publishing those models out. This is, if you want to, compete in this piece of this competition, these are the functions. If I need a logical or physical interface, if you're a payload, that's in a model that we give you. And that's, the static models. But, I mean, I think that's how we've got to communicate in order to go fast. When you write out a bunch of standards on a piece of paper, interpretation is there's a lot of errors in interpretation. It's not what you quite meant to say or buy. We've seen that, right? And so, and I think in the more dynamic piece, once we start to see these, I think we absolutely have to provide a digital proving ground, a test bed, a test harness, where if you are some piece of that stack, we can provide you all the rest of the pieces so that you can come in and test those interfaces. And is it the exact stack we'll use? No, but it is representative of all the pieces in that stack I just described so that you can continue and test and make sure your functionality makes sense in that stack. And then you've actually got to get it so it scales, right? There's no way, look at the number of no one RAS robot is going to win the war by itself. You need lots of them to create that mass. We're not going to get all those in the air or in the water, very often. And so, how do you do that? LVC. How do you scale that in a proving ground digital proving ground environment that then parlays to what parts you do need to go physically test on a range? I think it's key. I don't think we can do this without that.
So just a quick follow-up. So you had mentioned publishing interfaces and publishing kind of the model, the instantiation that you're looking for, which is a little bit different than writing out a standard like we've tended to do in the past. So it's a little more like the 3GPP model where I'm just going to publish, here's like a version of this that we were looking at. Is that what you're thinking publishing the interfaces is more important than having some codified single standard for how things work together?
Yeah, I have no intention of writing all new data standards. Hopefully no one expects us to write a bunch of data standards, right? I think there's a lot more modern ways to use our data. And I think industry is ahead of us in that, right? And how they drive that amongst their own partnerships. And so we need to learn from that. I think us driving mill standards and such into products drives a lot of cost and again a lot of room for errors and a lot more interoperability testing we'd have to do, which just slows down delivery in general.
Admiral Hash.
Yeah, and Rebecca your digital proving ground is fantastic. I mean, I think that's definitely the answer. And you mentioned at a very component level and inside. I think it needs to be at the environment level. I mean, what are we buying? We're buying an effect. And so the effect is a real answer. And so how you get there is this whole process we're going through. But really, we should be giving you the effect before you bend the first piece of metal or print the next piece of plastic. It needs to be in a model. Here's the effect we're looking for, and you need to build a model that can deliver that effect. And then get after the pieces and eaches and those kind of things about how we want to go down below that. But you ought to know the answer to the question before you get started. And we got to do that in a digital environment because, once again, we don't have enough time, space, or ranges to do this iteratively across a country with everything that's coming along. The mass matters. We will do some of it in open air because we can't digitize the entire world perfectly. But once again, where can we do the thousands and millions of iterations of the models and then go out and take it and verify that, in real life it matches that, or here's we're going to update the model based on that. But I think naval aviation is going 100% that way, whether you're manned or unmanned. You get an RFP, it's going to have a model. It's not going to be a set of standards or it's going to be follow the model, and here's when your model is due back for us to do the evaluation. That's the expectation as we move forward. And whether you're big or small, I think that's where we're headed. But that proving ground is important. I know across, once again, back to my experience in naval aviation, we're trying to generate that proving ground, generate that government architecture, whether it be a lab for weapons, the joint simulation environment for our aircraft and weapons integration, or that live virtual constructive environments where now you're using the same models in a virtual constructive, but you have some live components in there to add to it. So once again, increased complexity, increased fidelity, and you can iterate multiple times as you increase the complexity of the environment. But you're still in that robust environment the whole time. It's just how complex can you make that environment around it. So.
Right. So Admiral Kano, should we be making, when we think about what investments PARAS should be making and what the Navy should be making, it seems like we should be putting a lot more money into this digital engineering, this digital infrastructure rather, so that we can support this kind of proving ground idea. If it's really all about how adaptable you can be, I think what Ukraine has shown us is they put a lot of effort into the digital backbone. Sort of over time, right? It wasn't intentional, it was sort of how they backed into it. Is that where we need to be putting a lot more money instead of just buying gear and stacking it up on the shelf?
Yeah, 1,000%. And I would say that I think it's way past MBSE. This is what you're seeing in Ukraine are software updates as operational maneuver.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Software updates as operational maneuver. How fast is that? That is not you bringing an MBSE model and us taking a few months to do whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
This is an overnight, in hours kind of thing. And the only way you're going to do that is, one, you have to have this digital proving ground, some sort
Right.
of infrastructure. You said it too, Adam. I mean, this is where we've got to go, and we do have to invest in that. But I do think that the speed at which we're doing this, I mean, this is on a hyperscale.
yeah,
And I do think that having some ability to bring in digital twins,
Yeah.
not just the MBSE,
Right,
but
right.
the digital twins in the right environment, to understand the operability, to understand, and there's going to be layers of fidelity in this.
right.
But first, if you have one, you want to make sure that companies can come in very frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And so having an ability to say, can you interoperate with all the other stuff we've got going on in this architecture,
Yeah.
driven by whatever standards Rebecca puts out or whatever you're calling them. But I mean, this is where you would find out if
Yeah.
they can play.
Right.
And then as they can, now you can figure out, okay, these are the additional maneuvers we want to do. This is the additional collaborative autonomy we want. This is the effect we want.
Yeah,
Let's figure that out. Oh, that's an over-the-air software update? Boom.
right.
I think we've got to get there.
Right, and the level of fidelity, I mean, you can find the place where basically your model ends, right? So you're no longer able to get to the sufficient level of fidelity to answer these questions. So then you take it out into the field, I assume.
Yeah.
So Adam, I mean, industry is going to have to, I mean, industry has a bunch of this work, right? Because you do model-based system engineering, you do digital twins, and you do have digital environments. Can this kind of infrastructure that we're talking about here be federated, where we have industry contributing to it, and it's something that it's a shared resource that, companies and the government are able to tap into, as opposed to we're building this whole monolithic thing from scratch?
Yeah, I do think so. I think there's a part of industry to come to the table with their ideas on what do these standards look like, and bring the experts into the room and help shape what those standards look like and what they are. So a couple of things here. I do think models-based systems engineering they're pretty much table stakes at this point. I mean, everyone's getting on board with that, and I think it's proving to be an accelerator. Additionally, as we were talking about, like this digital ecosystem, if we're all working to the same systems, then we can start getting to the point of interchangeability between different software stacks and/or third-party apps or mission system suites. So I think that is a big unlock and enabler for what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so we'll get more into that later. But one thing I wanted, so you mentioned, Admiral, that you talked about, we're looking for an effect and we want to convey to industry that we're looking for a particular effect. I'd like you each to talk about how you view the way the government should be conveying to industry what is it that we're looking for. Because obviously we've relied on requirements and RFPs and that kind of model in the past. We're not going to be able to do that when we're trying to move this quickly. So how do we convey it? Is it in the form of an operational problem and we ask for industry to innovate on their potential concepts and capabilities, or do we give them an effect because we've thought through the concepts? I mean, what's the approach we want to take, and is that something we do via this digital environment rather than doing via paper? Rebecca?
Yeah, I think you already started to see it some with the Naval RCO kickoff, right? A big part of that was talking about the hard problems, the key operational problems, and I think that as each of us PAEs stand up and as they reform, the JROC and the requirements and such, you'll see us start to talk in terms of those problems. I think it's incumbent upon us to, if we can, translate them down, even if it's an analogous problem, into an unclassified manner too. Not everyone is clear. Not everyone has those facilities. There will always be some that are classified and have to stay there, right? But, if I'm going to come down and say, I need a truck, that carries this many containers, I can give you generally some use cases on what I would do with that truck, which would, we can, and then I can say, I need it to be this long-ish, go this fast-ish. I am not going to specify down to the, nth degree exactly how fast it has to go, how long it has to be. I will probably give you a swap requirement for power for those containers and such. But you're going to see far, far fewer very specific requirements. right? And you will see us talk a lot more about our problems because maybe we've envisioned even our broad, framework in I don't say the wrong way. We haven't fully thought through all the other options out there to solve that problem. And I think we, the government, have to be open to maybe we didn't get it right the first time when we solicited that. So that open dialogue is going to be really key. And we have to be open to iterate on our specifications inside kind of a top-level requirement framework that we work with our resource sponsors and OMNAV.
Do you think you'd be open to, I mean, if you have like in your mind, you have, this is going to be a medium vehicle, medium uncrewed surface vehicle that carries some kind of payload that does this mission. But what about if an industry's proposal comes in that's a very radically different approach? Like I'm going to have a whole bunch of small vehicles and I'm going to do this mission with a kind of a swarming technique. And, is that going to be too orthogonal to what it was you were envisioning?
I don't think it's necessarily orthogonal. I don't know that it will be my choice in that
Yeah.
point. I've got to go back to fleet at that point and say,
Right.
can you figure out the ConOps if we
Right.
come in with this type of solution?
Yeah.
What is the concept for deployment, right? I think that concept for deployment, which is mentioned briefly in the fighting orders, is really key in the RAS systems because these things aren't nuclear powered and they're not steaming across the ocean by themselves. So how are you going to deploy something if it doesn't have the range that we asked for, but maybe it's a creative solution or the endurance? So I think we have to be open to it, but it's not going to be purely the acquisition team that says that makes sense. So the fleet has to have the majority of that vote at that point.
Right. But how do we approach this challenge of conveying the need?
I think it really depends on the scale and size of the product you're looking at. I think Rebecca finished her product very much where I was going to start was, ultimately the COCOMs, right, here's how I'm going to carry out a combat in my theater. What does that look like? Here's the things I think I need based on the operational problems that are before me, and here's the effects that I need. And sometimes they're just that effects. They don't really know what solutions are going to get those effects. They may have a general idea of this type of thing. They know where the standard forces are going to fill in, but they leave those gaps that we're trying to fill in. And so that iteration's got to come back. I know that we have certain small groups in certain areas working with some of our regional commanders, our component commanders, really fleshing that out and understanding that. And what does that mean? Well, it means a couple things. It means you might get after a larger thing that I've got a big problem and I'm going to be a little more traditional, and the digital proving ground really is about the only solution to go fast. Yeah. Or maybe I've got a smaller problem that some of these interests, like, hey, I've got some things off the shelf today that might be the 85% solution.
Right.
It may not be the 100%, but let's go give it a trial. So the experimentation is really important. You saw that over in 5th Fleet. You see that now in 4th Fleet, where there are small things that they're just trying them out. Hey, what can that do? And we're learning and growing, and then we're iterating on what that thing can be used for. And then, oh, by the way, if you're doing that in the relevant environment and you bring the operator to watch it, they start thinking, oh, well, maybe it could solve this problem too, or that problem. It's being in the same place, creating innovative opportunities. And some of them are going to be real hardware in a real environment doing it at a smaller scale to do that. So I think that we got to think about levels of experimentation, levels of problem solving the digital environment, and then how do we connect operators with industry together and create those different sandboxes and playgrounds, both virtual and live, for us to go play with some of this stuff. And like I said, and not try to come up with a final solution and build it, but sometimes you got to go after that partial solution and go, am I getting close, or is this good enough to field for now where I'm working? It may take me 2 years to get the really good solution, but I can get you something right now that kind of gets you the stand-in, the solve the problem for right now.
So to build on that, Admiral Akano, so it seems if we think about the tailored force idea and we think about this idea of kind of having these virtual or physical sandboxes, it seems like when we talk about I need to scale this new solution, you may not need to scale it across the entire Navy, right? It doesn't. That really might make the problem more tractable. I don't need a whole bunch of these. I just need enough to satisfy this tailored force or this operational problem. Is that going to be? I mean, how do you handle that challenge now? I'm going to have a bunch of different forces handling a bunch of different operational problems, and I've got one PAE RAS that is attempting to support them all.
Yeah, I mean, I do think other services have looked at this model.
Yeah.
The Army does it fairly well with the 18th Airborne Corps.
Yeah,
If you're
good point.
familiar with them, they specialize in in really being agile and
Right.
adapting to something new, whether that's AI or whether that's whatever. I think we need to think through that. Certainly, I don't want to speak for the CNO and the operational side, but I do think that the two things I know for sure is, one, obviously we've got to bring in industry earlier. And, if we're going to get away from really understanding what these requirements are, which I think we won't know what they are,
Right.
I think sharing with industry, here's kind of the effect we need, here's kind of the mission we want. They might, to your point, they might come up with something novel or different. And we've got to be a little more creative in how we bring industry in. So you're going to see us inviting industry more to war games. I think sharing with industry our hard problems is one step. It's not the end step. I think having Adam and team and a lot of industry coming in and watching us, okay, here's how we play it at the fully informed level.
Right.
What do you all think? Do you have something different? I think there's that piece. The other piece is I do think that the operational community is going to have to be a little more malleable. and I don't think it's going to be like, well, we said this, and so fix your thing,
Right. Right.
for this. I do think there's going to be some give and take here to say, wait a minute, maybe we do need to change our ConOps or how we do things in order to support, what industry is bringing. That is not how we do things now, and so there's going to be a lot of learning involved.
And the CNO talked about that in terms of how do you invest in the capacity to have that kind of not just fielding and maintaining these systems, but also having the wherewithal to be able to come up with new ConOps and new combinations of systems and be able to provide that feedback. So you've got to empower people to be able to do that, but you've also got to make some investment in giving them the time and whatever the tools are they need to do that.
Right.
Adam, so industry as they're the recipients of this, all this largesse and all these problems. So what is industry looking for in terms of how do you define what it is that you're looking for industry to provide? Is it, are we looking for a problem to solve, or are you looking for an effect to deliver? Do you want more open-ended, opportunities, or do you want something a little bit more defined?
I would say if the government, if the Navy can explain what challenges they're facing, what the problem set is, keep industry informed on the most up-to-date information in terms of what are the threats doing, what are we doing, where do you see gaps. I think that is the first step, making sure we get all of the smart people within industry solving those problems, because as a couple of you said, there's a lot of innovation to be had, and I'm not necessarily going to come up with all the great ideas, but if we get a team on it and a really lot of bright folks in industry looking at those problems, they'll come up with innovative solutions. At Boeing, we utilize the Virtual Warfare Center, the VWC, and partner with the government to out-innovate the adversary. And that's really another powerful tool that we can utilize, like operational analysis tools, where we can play different scenarios and understand, if effects are going to be worth it, which ones are the right ones to utilize in certain scenarios and situations. So I'll go back to just saying, I think it's important to get that understanding mission effectiveness through operational analysis. We do that at Boeing through the VWC environment.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things, we have to be able to explain all the problems. We have to be able to test them all. Ultimately, we have to buy kit, and it has to translate down. And we have to realize that, shipyards don't manifest overnight and things like that. And so, I think the modularity is really going to be the key here as well, such that I know that it takes this long to build a boat. It takes maybe less time to integrate a new sensor or to adapt a sensor or a comms path. And so if we can, maintain that modularity, we actually keep our design space open longer to be able to solve the problems more quickly. So as we think through this, what is the longer lead item? Can we get down to something specific enough to get that going while we continue to refine what the solutions are against the operational problems, or create a suite of solutions against those operational problems? Because as the threat evolves, we might not buy a new boat, but I certainly might buy a new payload, right? And so that's where we've got to iterate on different timelines as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, not just in terms of defining the initial solution, but also giving you the adaptability to then evolve it, because the opponent will come up with a countermeasure. You'll have to counter that countermeasure, and you get into the competition that we see happening in Ukraine. Exactly. And then for the industry side, is that a way to also kind of give them a demand signal that might be more sustainable? Because you might buy a collection of mission systems that are going to be interchangeable amongst a variety of platforms. So you can buy the platforms and the payloads maybe independently and give them a chance to have a steady demand.
Yeah, that's our full intent. You won't see us solicit for like, I need everything from the boat to the comms to the mission autonomy in one stack anymore. And that's why I said in the very beginning, we're going to slow down for a minute and figure out what those conveyor belts are. So how do I buy the platforms? How do I specify payloads and payloads and sensors? And then how do I create those stacks where I may have, I know I need certain functions and I do need to be able to swap out best of breed or maybe scale them appropriately, depending if I'm talking about a small FPV drone or some, giant ship. Those will require different complexity in that stack. And I think what we want to see is, what I would like to see is, just on the government side, if you're a shipbuilder, you're probably not really good at working on a combat system software suite as a program manager, right? We don't all do all the things. Industry doesn't do all the things, right? So if we can separate those out and put that clear demand signal out, and that is our intent, a regular and recurring demand signal for the trucks, the hardware. How do we bring in on a software pathway and we open that back up? These are the types of functions I need. These are the payloads I need. These are the types of sensors I need. And they may operate on different drum beats because of that. But if we can put that signal out, that's our intent, is to put that regular and recurring signal out for each of those kind of pieces of the grander solution set.
So, Admiral O'Connor, one of the challenges that is going to come up as we think about how to become more adaptable like this is, how am I getting information from the field? How am I better understanding what's happening out there that might drive me to adapt my existing platform payload combination? So there's intel data that's got to make it somehow across the Title 10, Title 50 divide. I've got to get information on what's happening out in industry. There may be a new technology I can take advantage of. How do we figure out get that, the feed of technical and operational intelligence in the hands of the people who are making these types of changes?
I think that has to go into the architecture.
Yeah.
That has to be baked into the architecture. That, like, right now, foundationally, when we're out testing, all that information is getting dumped somewhere centrally,
Right.
and we're looking at it, and then we're getting sets and reps on that.
Right.
We don't do that very well right now.
Yeah.
That's not how the Navy operates.
Yeah.
We're very distributed, and we're kind of,
Right.
Everybody's
got their own little autonomous
exactly.
unit.
And so, I think technologically this isn't hard. I think culturally, that's where we're going to have to figure out how to do that. But if we can start with a tailored force, if we can start with something smaller, I actually think this is manageable, and I actually think some of this stuff might bleed into the general purpose force.
Right.
I really do.
Yeah.
I think you saw that, with the last CNO on kind of this fight from the mock. You kind of saw this movement to try and have information get centralized.
Right.
I think you're going to continue to see that, but I think it might be easier if you start with tailored forces.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Admiral Hash, if we're thinking about telemetry differently, right? So we're thinking about, I need this information not just for my test purposes, but I need feedback, I need data from my operating units to help me figure out how they need to change or how I need to adapt them over time. TRMC has talked about this for a while, this idea. George Rumford's talked about, we need to make every operating unit part of the test scheme.
Yes.
Is that the direction we need to go? And what are the pipelines that are going to get us that kind of data back to the people that need it?
Yeah, you actually said what I was about to say. We're I know in naval aviation especially, we are moving away from test aircraft and operational aircraft. You really want every aircraft as a test aircraft. Because the other reality is, even when you do all the digital environment testing, you do all the testing you think you need to do, you still haven't seen every environment possible. But when you put the aircraft out there operationally, you put your weapon systems out there operationally, they're going to have infinitely more test opportunities, and you want that data coming back so we can learn from it. I know the F-35 is a good example of a platform that essentially collects everything around it, and we want that data back, and we've got a reprogramming lab that uses that data, and we've been diligently working on the digital streams to bring it back.
Right.
And to Admiral Kano's point, that varies across services. Some services are better at that than others, and the Navy's actually one of those struggles because of those distributed pipelines. But we're actively working on how to do that and how to get that data back more efficiently. And oh, by the way, you don't want to just have one platform's data back. You want everybody's data back and bring it together so that we can use new technologies that are external to that, like AI and machine learning, so that we can get data out of it that we just never knew existed.
Right.
And so we can create new things. It's an opportunity to create new opportunities that we didn't know we had. And there's people actively working on that. I'm working on, teams. We do exercises now where we'll put a signal out and we'll have a data collect and we'll see, can you have everyone who participated in that, doesn't matter who collected it, we'll turn around and you can now see this signal that no one knew about before, but 24 hours later you can all have it in your data libraries and you're up and running. Those are the things that gets back into what's a hardware that we're not going to change as often, what's a digital payload that we might want to change its function, and what's a data file that you want to change in minutes. And so you got to separate and think about the work streams to make those happen. You got to break out the processes. We found a process where just a data file for an aircraft was actually done under a safety of flight protocol. Like, wait a second, that's not even necessary. You're just changing a piece of data that has nothing to do with the safety of flight of that component on that aircraft. But it was caught up in a process.
Right.
And so we find those barriers and start to break those down by exercising them now, like we're in combat. That's the other thing I'll try to say too. I've watched the Ukraine conflict, had folks that digitally or technically were involved in supporting some of the activities over there. They accept a level of risk because they're already getting shot at.
Right.
And until we get there, there are some risks we're not going to accept here. We don't want to risk life or limb until people is a higher cost of life and limb out in the world. But that's where the Ukrainians are, and they're willing to accept that risk, and that's why they do absolutely change the software on the fly and run. We will do that too if we start getting shot at. But until then, we've got to create these more robust environments to do that, like it. And how do we use the real world environments out there to bring that data back to learn so that we can apply it today?
So a question for you, for Adam as well. So how do we, if we decide to make a change in the data file of an aircraft or in its mission autonomy, we need to push that out there. I mean, we push out updates to the F-35 on a not frequent basis. How do we increase the speed with which you do that? Because on a commercial company, they'd have like a CI/CD pipeline, and they're pushing new updates out daily. But we can't do that, or we don't do that. So how can we get to do that?
I think it is following that commercial model of getting to CI/CD pipelines, and industry is going that way. I think some of the challenges that we'll see is how do you get that through all of the processes that we're used to, or how do we tailor the processes to enable it? But everything that we've been talking about today around digital ecosystems, digital twins, the standards that we're talking about developing too, help enable all of those things and help create that pipeline of capability. One of the things additionally, as I'm thinking about it, how do we go faster to get something to the fleet? We can think of that as min viable products, as Admiral Hash mentioned. Let's get the hardware right, get that min viable capability out for that major capability that's needed, and then you can iterate it along the way. The product 3 years after it's fielded will be better than the day it was fielded.
That's right.
Can I say something about this? Because I'm very passionate about this. Look, I do think there's pockets of excellence in the Navy that are doing this. So I want to recognize the fact that there are a lot of smart, forward-leaning program managers that have been thinking about this for a while and are actually doing it. And hats off to you. You are future leaders. I will say waiting until war is too late. And we saw this in the Red Sea where we had to push a software update over to Aegis, and there was a shaking FC2 that had to do this on the other side. And that is, that left an impression on me that we do not want to put ships in this position.
Right.
It is too late to be in a WES trying to do a software update to fix a combat system. Why are we not doing this in peacetime?
Yeah.
Why are we not doing sets and reps right now on how to do this? So that's number one. Number two is it doesn't necessarily need to be, some of this stuff can be a pull. So,
Right.
I mean, let's just
Yeah,
talk about
good point.
readiness, for example. There's nothing technological that's stopping us from pulling network health data off of a ship right now and saying, guess what? You have vulnerability. You have, this is about to go down, and I'm just fixing it
Right.
from the shore.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping us from doing this.
Right.
And yet, no, what do? We wait until it breaks, and then we read a CAS rep, and then we're down for, 2 weeks, and then we scramble at the ISEA and the RMC. And it is just, it's painful to watch because it's preventable,
Right,
in
right,
my opinion.
right. Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
do think we've got to take a round turn on this. This is our entire ecosystem has to take a round turn on this, because it's not a technological problem.
Right, right. Well, we often historically downplayed the role or the importance of combat system updates, and it's all about the kinetics and the people, and we kind of focus the combat system as a supporting element. But it seems like that we got to flip that model on its head, where in a lot of ways that combat system is going to be the thing that keeps you alive. So keeping
Yeah.
it up to date is going to be the most important thing you do.
Right. Yeah. And I'm just going to add it to, part of what Adam talked to early on was, we have more modern systems. We can break apart the things that are safety of flight, human life critical, and the things that are combat critical, and even the things that are, once again, data on top of that. And we got to be structured so that reference architecture, thinking that way so that I'm not going to build it in such a spaghetti mode that I don't know how those things all connect
Right.
is important. And that means that we need to come together. And there are good open system architectures that are being developed in consortium with industry and government, and we need to follow those. And that allows, once again, for greater competition. More players can get on the field and support those things, but also allows us to be rapid. Because we know if you change in something this layer, I am going to have to go test that because there's some human being that could die if I don't do that right. But in all these other layers, we can be more iterative. We can get changes out. We can get things fixed. And not worry about having to go through a certification process that we've learned through blood. And so, we've been overly prescribed and overly conservative for many years because of the blood we learned it through. But if we can break that apart and really define the things that are absolutely necessary to be tested in those certifying environments, and those other things that can be tested in more an operational environment, or, we'll just see. Just play with it. It's not really a test involved at all.
Right.
Or we can run it through the digital scheme because we know that if through this digital scheme you don't touch anything below this, you're not affecting anything. So there's lots of things that we can continue to do. Just like Admiral Kano said, we can do today. It's not a technology problem. It's a culture problem. It's a process problem. It's a will problem. And it's a all of us together problem, government and industry working together, that we are going to change our culture and we're going to follow these new ways of thinking. So.
And with robotic and autonomous systems, there's obviously a level of risk that's lower, right?
That's what I was going to say. I was like, selfishly, moving
Yeah,
it back to
exactly.
me. I think that the RAS systems, it's the perfect place to try this.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, flight safety, weapon safety notwithstanding, we're going to have rules that we're going to have to figure out how to speed up some of that. But I mean, this is the perfect place to go figure out how to move faster in software, how to push it out every day. Also, I'm not going to touch that thing every day. It's going to be somewhere else probably. I don't have people that can go.
Right.
I don't have an FC2
Right.
sitting there waiting for the over-the-air update to burn it on a CD and move it somewhere else, right? It will have to be completely hands off. And so I think this is the perfect domain in which to try this.
Right.
So, I think we got a lot of learning to do, but I think we can learn a lot from industry who does this every day, all day long.
Right. So I'm going to turn to questions from the audience. So if you have questions, start posting up there by the microphone. And while they're doing that, let's talk about the industry. So Admiral Kano, we've got a lot of companies have entered the autonomous system space. They all have kind of a different model for how they're going to make money and how they're going to stay in business. how should we think about the role of industry versus the role of government here in terms of like R&D versus procurement and services? Is there a way to make it so that these companies can come up with viable business models that are sustainable into the future?
Absolutely. I think you're seeing, so short of telling you all what our act strategy is, I will say that we are taking a lot of time to think about a different acquisition strategy. A lot of time. Rebecca hates me for this because I'm forcing her to think through this. But like, this is, we want a lot of vendors in this area. We want this to be, you hear us kind of say, Rebecca said it, the conveyor belt model where, you're going to see multiple openings a year for opportunities for industry to come in and play in this area. And have you spend your own R&D to fix things and be, say if you miss it this year, you're going to make that better and compete next year or whatever that frequency is. So again, using your R&D in the right area for you to have a big upside in the future because your upsides are upside. But I think what we don't want are vendor lock. What we don't want is, an architecture that's so fragile that it's, you can't bring in new entry. And so that we're really thinking through that.
Are you thinking about maybe models where industry comes in, they do their own R&D, they come in with something, and if it meets a certain set of whatever characteristics or solves a problem in a particular way, that you'll buy it in some number so that they can feel like I've got some kind of defined back end that I'm able to build a business around, and they're not going to find that they did the R&D, they come up there and they've got a successful system, but in the meantime, we've decided not to buy it.
I think we are really going to champion dual use. Companies that really are thinking through, hey, I'm not going to get all my revenue through the government, but I've thought through how this could be, I could get money through a commercial application. I think that's really enticing for us. I think you're going to see us, again, because this is so rapid, I think you're going to see us think through more COCO models. I think you're going to see us think through GOCO models, where we really want you to think through sustainment. We really want you to think through managing obsolescence. We want you to think through, storage and all that stuff. And really what we're going to look for is how do you update that software? How do you update, how do we keep the missions up? But, we will send you a demand signal so that if you are going to put money into production, you will see a steady demand signal from us on whatever that, if that's leasing or what have you, over a period of time.
Let me add one comment to that at the beginning of the questions. I think of the dual use piece, right? We're so used to saying use this mill standard and this type of technology, and that means you can't export it. That means we've done something that's not using a commercial standard. You can't get it into dual use. So we're going to try not to do that. We're going to use commercial standards. These boats aren't meant to last 30 years, or the aircraft, or, there are a lot of them on a one-way mission. If you see us doing that, or if there's something we don't realize that puts you in some sort of, class of ITAR restriction, come tell us. We likely did not do that on purpose. We did not realize necessarily the full ramifications of how we specified it. So I have a white paper in hand right now on some of the ways we're specifying boats, and we've got to go look at a policy because the policy doesn't make sense for, and so, so our intent is to make it as easy as possible to have, a dual use mission. But if we are doing something that precludes that, please let us know.
Add one more to that. The dual use might be government mission. As the guy who does tests, we need targets. And some of these things that we may buy some as the system, and some of it might be the thing we need to use against the system. So just be aware that there are other uses out there, and that we're looking for that too. So.
Oh, good point. Let's go to audience questions. So please state who you are and where you're from, and then your question, which has to be short. Thank you.
Testing? Yeah, it's working good. Retired Admiral Scott Jones, and a freelancing now. Good to see you again, Brian. Yeah. Old history. So I've lived through this dream a lot on both sides of this world, both from a government side and also from the contracting side. And at NOC TSD, they have the Naval Cooperative Training Environment, which has an architecture framework that, the systems have to talk. And it's like when we're bringing in software on aircraft and things like that. When do you see yourself, you can't go around these trade shows without swinging a dead cat, and no difference to cat lovers here, without hitting a UAV out here, or unmanned vehicles now. They need an architecture to build to talk to, because they're spending an awful lot of money, developing this system. So is there something getting ready to be published out there?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're working on
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Right? We realized that. So as we collected our, dozens of actual programs of record and hundreds of FSNT efforts, that we can't lash into a usable architecture right now, right? And that are, to your point, spaghetti like functions all over and interfaces and data flowing all over. We are working to separate that out. I understand speed is of the essence, and so that is one of the things we want to get after first, because we can't really start specifying and getting those conveyor belts moving until we separate out those layers and those pieces of the architecture.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Admiral.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your insightful comments this afternoon. My name is Andrew Timbush, call sign Kramer. At the United States Civil War College Wargaming Department, we currently struggle with integrating existing autonomous systems based on the lack of mission level models. We talked a lot about getting in the hands of end users and operators early. And there was a lot of talk also about model-based systems engineering. Is there any plan in this acquisition architecture to include preliminary early mission-level models so we can get those in the hands of fleet and force war games and see how users will use them? And then to Vice Admiral Connell's point about sometimes the users will have to be forced to adopt things. This would be the perfect opportunity to test out those preliminary ConOps and see what the use case is prior to buy or build decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're spot on. Right now, we don't do that. And so, I kind of mentioned inviting industry to war games. What if those war games morphed into something where we did something like this?
Right.
And we ran different scenarios. Instead of having future games that are kind of more paper, we have something where, we can bring in maybe some ideas, see if we need to, if that fits the mission or not, run different missions. I do think we have to think about that differently. So I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, and I'll just say from an aviation point of view, we've been doing something like this. Adam mentioned the Virtual Warfare Center. That's not just a Boeing thing. They host it, but it's all industry come together, and we bring in future capabilities. The Navy's investing in environments, the Joint Simulation Environment. We're starting to add in more capabilities, both surface and aviation, into that, so that we can do that kind of thing iteratively. And that's the point. The Air Force is doing the same thing. They're investing in the Joint Simulation Environment with that very purpose, so that we can do those early iterations in a virtual reality of what that looks like. I think we got published in the paper maybe a month or so ago that they brought early CCAs into Joint Simulation Environment at Pax River, Maryland. That was another iteration of, hey, bring in some operators, bring in some concepts. We'll see how would we use these things if they did that, or if they did that, how would we use them, and have those conversations. That's, for large scale things, I think we're getting there. The small scale things, that's the one we got to create that different environment. And so there's a whole lot more work to go, but I think we're starting to take some strides in that direction. And maybe we're not connected to the War College, and for a global or something like that we would want to do a more hands-on approach, and so there's opportunity to expand that out.
Well, even your question of like when the CNO rolled out his tailored, force and offsets. Yeah. We don't really have a digital environment to really understand what that would be.
No.
And that's what you're asking.
And what we struggle with is adjudication, and what level of data is behind it. And often it's adjudication, and we're not really getting, even with like LRASM, right, a current autonomous system, it's a guessing game of how that integrates and how we adjudicate, and then what that effect is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Captain Elaine Breed from Fleet Cyber, 10th Fleet. Have a question regarding the system reliability engineering of ship alts and permanent and temp alts themselves for kits and fielding of capabilities. Was wondering how, with the policy of actually being able to bolt on full systems and capabilities for combat systems in particular, has there been a consideration of how that SRE for hull mechanical engineering will change, or if there's any thoughts on how ship alts and temp alts are going to be implemented as we're bringing out all these capabilities?
I can talk to you. That's not a very much an autonomous question, but we can talk about it. I can tell you that my thoughts on avails, when it comes to avails, is that really you should not be doing, in my opinion, network C4I combat systems in those avails, in my opinion.
Yeah.
There's no reason.
Yeah.
Leave those avails to hard HM&E. You're replacing engines, and you keep it simple, and you're ruthless about getting that ship out on time. When it comes to frequent updates, combat software, one, if you're a program manager in any sort of combat systems or C4I, shame on you for cutting holes in the ship for updating your software. Shame on you, right? So we should be at the point right now where you have separated out software and hardware. You can bring on compute stack, which is commodity. Should not be doing some sort of cottage industry, compute stack. Putting that in there and updating it frequently peer side. Maybe even underway. Who knows? I mean, you did it.
Yes, ma'am.
We did it together.
We did.
Yes, and it can be done. That's how it should be, right? And you shouldn't be waiting for an avail in order to update software or targeting. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, ma'am.
I remember being midshipman hash on a reserve frigate out of Long Beach, and the captain handed me a Fiorino radar, said, "Mount that on my ship somewhere, son." And I did it. So yeah, we've done it in the past. We could do it in the future for sure.
But to the broader point, too, is I guess with autonomous systems, we don't necessarily have to have the same approach to modification that we've had in the past, which we have not been generally good at. I mean, there's people at NAVC that have imposed those kinds of technical standards on.
I mean, can you imagine if Rebecca's like, I'm going to pull all of my USVs in for an avails to update
And I got to get
software.
approvals for a ship alt.
Get approvals. I mean, that would be catastrophic.
Yes.
But so revisiting technical standards may
Yes.
be an element of this too. Right.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your comments. Sage Bornstein at GovSignals. I come from the venture capital community, used to be in Ukraine myself. So much to talk about, but I'm really interested in how you're thinking holistically about the acquisition structure, how to get greater fidelity from the operator through up and down the chain of command, and then how to be able to bring in new vendors. There's so many vendors in the autonomous space who don't have the resources to have acquisition specialists themselves interacting with PEOs and PAEs. And so I'm just wondering how you're thinking holistically about the best ways to get fidelity throughout that system. Right now a lot of POs are using NavAir, PMS, AMT, and I'm just wondering about that acquisition infrastructure.
Yeah, I'll say, I think, what you're going to see is, we talk about the conveyor belt model, but I think that putting out that demand signal, I think helps the companies go get investment. It helps them, if we go out and we put out, we need this many in our fleet, the administration says, we're commercial first. We want more than one supplier, like that's a requirement, right? To keep more than one supplier alive. I think if we follow that, and then if we're not going with like full FAR-based contracts where you have to understand all that, I mean, we're talking about some of our OTs or the way DIU does things, a 15-slide presentation. Any company can put that together, right? Or if you've got an asset, maybe we start to put it through, I call it the obstacle course, right? Or the gauntlet that we're going to put it through. And that's the test to say, okay, we're ready to invest in the next step of this. So I think you'll see us, be less rigid. We're not buying aircraft carriers. They're not nuclear and they don't have to last 50 years, right? I'm buying something that might last a couple of years maybe. And so I think that we have the flexibility to do things. No, I don't think. I know we have the flexibility to do things much differently than what we're doing, and with essentially, I mean, a legal but different rule set than buying a traditional a manned fighter craft or a ship. And so I think that really opens it up to all the non-traditionals and small companies. Sure. And and I think you'll find we have a front door email. If anyone's emailed, like our team gets back in like minutes. Right, and we will go back and forth with you and work with you on like how to even talk to us.
I will say organizationally, that was the real reason to stand up a single PAE for robotics and autonomous systems, so that it is kind of a bug light. Yeah. Is the single, door to, get into the organization.
Yep. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Can I add just one more thing? So as they do that, the your labs, we have special authorities. Our warfare centers and labs. We can do cooperative research and development activities, and I'm sure as Rebecca stands up PAE, she will use those authorities through those labs. And we can have early agreements that cost nothing. The government's not giving you money, you're doing your early development, but we share knowledge about that operational, and we share knowledge on how to interact with the government and what we're looking at next. And I know my Warfare Center does that with every entrance into an energetic or a weapon. I don't care how big you are or how small you are, we want to help you be successful. And so there are other warfare centers out there that will be probably a lot more focused on these small unmanned with a surface or small aviation kind of things. And that's a great way to get that first step, especially if you just never dealt with the government before.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Adam, do you want to?
I will. Yes.
hovering.
That's okay. Brian and all the members of the panel, I'd like to thank you. And on behalf of AFC International and the U.S. Naval Institute, I'd like to present you all with a token of our gratitude. That is a book by Naval Institute Press, Maritime Unmanned, appropriate for the panel. So that is your copy, and I have copies for everybody else. Thank you all for coming. This session's a wrap. We're going to turn over this meeting space for our next panel. But if you have questions, please come up, take a moment to engage the panelists, and have a nice afternoon. Thank you very much.